I guess the one thing is I'm really happy that it's raining, but I wish it would come down a lot harder because I think we all need it. This kind of showing up today was planning on standing out in the field and just talking about a little bit what we've been doing, but luckily, you know, when you've been doing this for a long time, you have some slides that are already kind of put together, so hopefully we can talk about some of the issues that we've been seeing. The one thing I thought I would do is talk a little bit about grasses and wheat. We're seeing a lot more grasses start to show up in some of our wheat fields. And one of the ones that we've had as a problem, and I think in this area, generally you guys have seen some problems with windgrass. And generally this has been a problem in kind of this neck of the woods up and through the thumb. But we're starting to see this show up with a few more wheat fields. So just to make people aware of what we're seeing, as well as some of the other grasses that we can see in wheat. Again, this has kind of been the common distribution of where windgrass has shown up. We've been getting some reports down in Ionia County where we think some windgrass has also shown up. This is actually a winter annual weed, so it comes up about the time wheat does. So it's, you know, it's a fall emerger. We haven't studied it very closely, but I have, in some of our trials, haven't seen anything come up in the spring. So some of our fall herbicide applications have worked well, and I'm going to share some of those results. So biggest problem is it has a similar growth pattern to wheat. Okay, so it's going to come up about the same time and grow about the same distance. So if you look at this, you can see here's some wheat, in between here is windgrass. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. There is a sample up here in this bucket, and we're actually continuing to do some research. We have some plots up in Palms, Michigan right now, and got some really good results, and we'll kind of follow this through the season, looking at some of those fall applications as well as some of the spring ones that we've basically looked at. So just to show you, when it does come up, it is extremely small. So here's some pictures taken in November. You can see the small windgrass seedling there, very tiny. So it's one of those things where if you're scouting for it, you pretty much have to get down there on your hands and knees and really look. So generally, if you start to see windgrass in your area showing up in wheat, you're probably going to have it. Again, it's moved very readily with the combine and other types of equipment. So this is April, starts to tiller out a little bit. One of the key things to look for when you are trying to identify windgrass is this ligule. It is a membranous ligule that gets to be very long. And as the plant gets bigger, that ligule gets to be quite a bit bigger. So this is June. So this is taking the top part of that wheat or that windgrass plant off, and you can see just how long that ligule is. And it can be a little bit jagged at the top. And it continues to grow. This is July. Again, look how long that ligule is. So that's one of the key things to identifying windgrass. And then at the end of the season, basically this is what the panicle looks like. It's very spread out, and it has a reddish tinge to it. Like I said, we've been doing some research over the last several years. We had 2 years where we did a lot of work looking at fall and spring applications of some of the more common herbicide treatments. These are some of the fall applications that we had. And this is really looking at fall applications. After the wheat's been planted, the wheat starts to come up. We're looking at probably 2-leaf or larger wheat in the fall. And basically, it's usually about that early November when there's a good time period to put those fall applications on for windgrass control. The two herbicides that we found that worked the best were Powerflex and Osprey. Both of those herbicides applied in the fall have worked very well for controlling common windgrass. We did use some fall applications of Axial XL and Puma. Not as good as the other two sulfonylurea herbicides, so both of those worked really well. And then before we had some of these newer herbicides, a couple of things that growers would do would be post-plant incorporated applications of Treflan. Other times growers would try to use a pre-emergence application of Treflan after the wheat was planted and hopefully have it rain in. And in this case, this is the kind of control we got from that in those particular years. So didn't have a lot of rainfall for that to work. So again, we do have some fall applications that have worked well. Just to show you a comparison and how thick this weed can be, this was that pre-application in Trefland, and this is PowerFlex applied in the fall. And this would be Osprey applied in the fall. So again, we've had some really good luck. And then our research plot this year, that's exactly what we're seeing from those fall applications. With the spring applications, we also have gotten really good control with both PowerFlex and Osprey for windgrass. Axial XL in the spring has worked, pretty well. And with Puma, we've gotten some escapes. So again, pretty much we're seeing very good luck for control with both PowerFlex and Osprey, either from fall applications or spring, but we do see a few differences between the fall and spring applications. And the biggest thing is the speed of control of windgrass. So if we applied in the fall, basically we don't have any windgrass in the spring. We start to apply it in the spring, it takes a while for those herbicides to work. So this is looking at about 1 month after treating the wheat, and this is the windgrass control from the fall and spring with PowerFlex. So you can see, about 80% control compared to 100% control at that time, and with Osprey, a little bit lower, but by July, so 2 months after, pretty much we have very good control in both. It just takes a while for both of these herbicides to work, particularly on the spring applications, and that's exactly what we're seeing again this year.
When was that herbicide applied in the spring?
Generally, we're applying that towards the end of April, okay? Early May. So just kind of depending on when you have an opportunity to go out there and put your spring applications on. We're usually shooting for around that Feeks 4, Feeks 5 growth stage in the wheat. So just a couple of pictures, I don't know if you can really see it, but this would be early in the season, fall applications, and you can see here, you do have that windgrass. It's just kind of sitting there and taking a while for it to die from the spring applications. And we see that with both the PowerFlex and the Osprey. So we do have some pretty good recommendations, and again, we're looking at some other herbicides. There are some pre-emergence herbicides that we've been looking at, and also looking at some combinations. Both of these products can be mixed with some of our other, what we would consider broadleaf herbicides, like Husky or Affinity Broadspec, and we've had good results. By putting those on in the fall, the one thing we do see is any of the spring emerging plants like common ragweed, common lambsquarters, we're not getting that control. So you can maybe help with your winter annual control, but as far as the spring emergers, you're not going to see that control. So depending on what your issues are, you may want to put the grass herbicide on in the fall and then come back in the spring, possibly with a broadleaf herbicide. But as far as common windgrass, again, we've got those two herbicides that have worked well with both fall and spring applications. With the fall applications, we need to make sure that that windgrass has emerged. And again, it's usually pretty tiny at that time when you go out there and make those applications. You may not think that you have any out there, but if you look really closely, you'll see that windgrass start to come up. Again, usually that's around that early to mid-November time frame. And then as far as I mentioned before, as far as summer annual weeds, if that's going to be an issue, that's really where we should be applying some of those other products like Affinity Broadspec or Husky to help control those. For spring applications, we do see good control, but it is kind of a slower kill. So we're still trying to determine whether that's actually affecting the wheat yield, because those weeds are possibly competing a little bit longer. So again, seeing good results both from fall and spring, but it's just the speed of control that we're seeing differences in. So in your packet, there is that fact sheet that we've had out. Talks a little bit about how to identify windgrass, also what our recommendations are. So that's also in the back of our weed control guide. The other thing I wanted to mention is we're starting to see more kind of winter annual grasses showing up in wheat. One of those is cheat, which is a bromus species, and it's Bromus secalinius. And if you look at this plant, you can definitely tell the seed heads are quite a bit different, and we're going to compare that with another grass that this one is often confused with. So we have cheat, basically that has kind of a jagged ligule. Around here it can be smooth or slightly hairy. Okay, so that's one way to tell the difference between cheat and the next weed I'm going to talk about, which is actually cheatgrass or Downy Brome. Okay, so a lot of people get those two grasses confused. We do see cheat showing up in some of our fields. There's also the possibility of Downy Brome, but we're probably seeing more cheat than we are the Downy Brome, or what other people may call cheatgrass. So a lot of times people will use those interchangeably, but we're looking at two different species. They're both brome species, but cheatgrass or Downy Brome is called Bromus tectorum. So, and there are some differences in control, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up. As far as the cheatgrass or Downy Brome, when it emerges, one of the things that we do see with the seedlings is it kind of has a twist to the leaf. So that's a little bit different than many of the other grasses when they come up. Again, these are also winter annual weeds. It has a ragged ligule here, and the one thing with cheatgrass or Downy Brome is it is very hairy. So it's got dense hairs, it feels very soft to touch, very velvety, so there's a lot of hair on there. A lot of times we do see some purpling on the leaf sheath, and then once it starts to put its seed head out, you can definitely see that it has these long awns. So here's a seed head of Downy Brome, and you can see kind of the spikelets where they have these awns, which are quite a bit different than cheat. So if we're to look at a comparison between cheat and Downy Brome or cheatgrass, you can see they do look quite a bit different once they put the seed head on. So just as you're going through and combining your wheat fields, if you start to see some grasses in the wheat, we'd like to know about it. Generally, we haven't seen grasses as a huge issue other than the windgrass, but I think we're starting to see quite a bit more cheat and maybe some other grasses that might be coming up. As far as management, if you are seeing those in your wheat, there is a little bit different recommendations as far as what actually is labeled for control of both of these weeds. As far as with cheat, both Powerflex and Osprey are both effective. They're both on the label. And with the Downy Brome or cheatgrass, Powerflex is on the label. So those are a couple things to keep in mind as you're looking at those wheat fields this spring. So that's kind of what I have talking about for winter annual grasses and wheat. Does anybody else have any questions about that? Yes.
The fall application, can you still cross seed clover in the spring?
That's a really good question. And in fact, there's a poster up there that kind of talks about some of that. So over the last couple of years, we've done some of that research. With the Osprey and Powerflex, we can cross seed the clover. We have seen a little bit of reduction in clover that comes up. It's not 100% catch as like what we see with maybe in a Husky or an Affinity Extra or Affinity Broad Spec from fall applications, but we do seem to get a catch. With our spring applications, we know that we're wiping out the clover. And in fact, the study that we have going on right now, we have half of those plots, or the back half of the plots frost seeded with clover. So once the wheat harvest, we'll have a really good indication of some of the other treatments that we're trying. So yeah, it is an option, but we do see a slight reduction, so yes.
Does it have a residual or is it a contact?
They're systemic. They do go through the plant, but I don't think we get a lot of residual control of those grasses. So it's not that, I think a lot of it is dependent on what is up at the time of your application. Good question. Any other questions? Yes.
Does Husky do anything for that in the fall?
Husky is really just a broadleaf herbicide. We have not seen any grass activity from Husky applications. So if you do have grasses, that's where you want to maybe tank mix with an Osprey or tank mix with a Powerflex. Any other questions? Yes. That's a good question. The question is, does tillage make a difference? And one of the things about this plant, if you look at it, it's got very small seeds. I think the way that tillage would make a difference is if you were going to deep plow, flip it over, and bury it. If you're not doing that, you're probably not going to do a whole lot as far as differences in emergence patterns. I still think you're going to have some issues. Any other questions? Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about is something that we started working on about did some trials or just some preliminary stuff a couple years ago, and then last year did some more work looking at some of the pre-harvest herbicide applications. Probably won't be as much of an issue this year. We've had pretty good wheat stands out there, but the past previous years where we had a lot of winter kill, a lot of holes in some of those fields, we did see some weedy messes, so we wanted to see what effects some of those pre-harvest applications are. There are a few herbicides that are actually labeled for pre-harvest applications in wheat. We wanted to see how well the weeds were controlled and what effect it had on the wheat. Obviously, when you have a field that looks like this, where you've got green lambsquarters plants that have kind of taken over, the combine is not going to go through that very well, and then obviously you will see some dockages with the foreign material that's in there. So again, what we've done is tried to answer a couple questions. What's it do for weed desiccation, and what is that wheat harvestability? Because as we're starting to take those combines through those fields and there's a lot of green tissue, it's very difficult for those to work. A year ago, and then we'll be repeating this study this next year, we did a study on campus and basically planted late to make sure that we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a very good wheat stand because we wanted those weeds to be able to come through, and we're trying to do the same thing this year. And basically what we want to do is look at those pre-harvest applications when wheat is mature, and we're really shooting for when the grain moisture is less than 30%. And that's really when a lot of these pre-harvest applications are labeled for. So the herbicides that we do have labeled for pre-harvest applications in wheat are different than some of the ones that we have labeled for soybeans or also dry beans. So the ones that we have that are labeled are Clarity at 8 ounces, 2,4-D at 1 pint. AIM is also labeled at 1.5 ounces with a methylated seed oil. One that is not labeled that we thought we would look at and may possibly get a label in the future is Sharpen. So we looked at Sharpen. Again, we use that a lot in our dry beans for as a desiccant. And looked at that with methylated seed oil and ammonium sulfate. We can also use glyphosate. In this case, we use the what is the labeled rate, which is 22 fluid ounces of Roundup Power Max, so 3/4 of an ounce or 3/4 of a pound acid equivalent of glyphosate plus AMS. And then we looked at a couple different tank mixtures with Power Max or Roundup and Sharpen and Roundup and AIM, just to see if we would see quicker kill or any differences there. So again, Sharpen is not registered for wheat yet, but we wanted to see what it would do. So a couple things that we wanted to look at was how well it desiccated the weeds, what the difference is as far as machine performance. We call these harvestability numbers. So did it go through the plot really easily? Did it take longer? How was that machine running? So we did that kind of as a subjective measurement from 1 to 10. Looked at grain moisture, test weight, foreign material. We also looked at the weight of 100 seeds and then seed viability to see if any of those herbicides actually caused a decrease in seed germination. So we're going to look at some of the desiccation results. So again, this was our untreated, so we had a lot of lambsquarters in there. We had some common ragweed also in there. This is glyphosate. This is about 15 days after application. And one thing that we did is we took evaluations at 3, 7, and 15 days. Most of our pre-harvest intervals, depending on the product, can range anywhere from 3 days to 7 days. And we do have a section in the weed control guide that you can look at. So looking at common ragweed desiccation, the dark green bar is 3 days, the evaluation. 7 days is the medium green, and then the bright green is 15 days. Most of the time we don't want to wait 15 days, but if you look at this information, really the only treatment that provided very good control at 3 or 7 days was Sharpen by itself. And again, this is not a labeled product yet, and this is with common ragweed. However, with common lamb's quarter, Sharpen didn't work as effectively. So basically anything that had glyphosate, whether it was glyphosate alone or plus Sharpen or AIM, it took about 15 days. So with a lot of these pre-harvest treatments, it does take a while for those weeds to actually dry down and desiccate for good harvestability. So again, this is our harvestability scale. The lower the number, the better the combine ran through those plots. And as you can see here, the Roundup or glyphosate plus Sharpen, and glyphosate plus AIM had our best harvestability. So basically it was because of the lamb's quarter, and we needed to get that under control. From our harvest data, as far as moisture, our moisture was lower because we had less green tissue in there with any of the glyphosate treatments. And then also the foreign material was lower, so those were much lower than the untreated. And then our yield was not different based on any of the herbicide applications, because basically, again, the yield is going to be established by that time. So we didn't see any shattering or anything, so none of the treatments, any of the pre-harvest treatments did not affect yield. So just kind of a quick summary of some of the stuff that we've done. Sharpen worked well with ragweed for ragweed desiccation, and it worked quickly, but again, not labeled, and it didn't really do anything for lamb's quarter by itself. With the glyphosate, we probably need 14 to 15 days for that maximum desiccation for those weeds, ragweed and lamb's quarter. With those treatments, we had a more favorable test weight and seed moisture, less foreign material, and then we did see an improvement in the wheat harvestability. And none of the treatments affected yield. So as far as thinking about pre-harvest treatments this year, it's not a common practice to be used, but in certain fields where we have some major weed escapes that we're not able to be controlled, this might be an option for some growers. Generally, the glyphosate has worked the best, and it does take some time. The other thing is with the tank mixtures, it may help with control of some of the glyphosate-resistant weeds. So, for example, if we start seeing more glyphosate-resistant common ragweed, if we get the opportunity to potentially have Sharpen labeled, that might be where a good fit is. Or potentially with some glyphosate-resistant horseweed or mare's tail. So, again, really like to thank the Michigan Wheat Program because they've helped support this funding, and we're doing a lot of different things in wheat, looking at some new products, as well as kind of continuing on some of the same lines of research to get more years of data. And if you have questions about some of the work we've done with the frost seeding clover and the different herbicides, that poster over there will answer some of those questions. Is there any other questions that I might be able to answer? Don't walk in front of the speaker. What was that? Proxysulfone? Zidua? Is that what you're wondering? Oh, gramoxone. The question was, did we try gramoxone? Gramoxone is not labeled for wheat. Yeah. I just figured gramoxone's been out there a lot longer, so if it was going to be labeled, it probably would have been labeled by now. With Sharpen, they are potentially talking about looking at a wheat label, so that was one of the reasons why we did. Yeah, we haven't looked at gramoxone for this, but in our driving trials, we've had some good lamb's quarter desiccation. So if you're growing dry beans and you're looking for, that has worked well. Any other questions? All right.